There is a curious charm in the town of Oakwood, a quaint little settlement that seems to be untouched by the tides of time. Nestled among rolling hills and dense woods, the town paints itself in a palette of rustic hues, its streets lined with cobblestones that speak of history, its houses with gabled roofs whispering tales of generations past. On any given day, the townsfolk go about their business with a calm demeanor, their lives seemingly uncomplicated and their days predictable, like the steady ticking of an ancient clock. I had arrived in Oakwood with little more than a suitcase and a sense of curiosity about the small town life that had been described to me with such warmth by an old friend. It was the kind of place where you could lose yourself in the simplicity of routines. Or so I believed at the time. There was a sense of community here, the kind that envelops you, and I was eager to be a part of it. My days were spent exploring the town, meeting its residents, and slowly becoming familiar with the local customs and traditions. The town was preparing for the wedding of Evelyn Carter, a young woman of grace and beauty, known to many as the town's pride. Her union with Charles Hastings, a man from one of Oakwood's most prominent families, was the topic of much excitement. I was drawn into the festivities, invited to witness what promised to be a grand celebration, a testament to the town's spirit and unity. But there was something about Evelyn that caught my attention, beyond her radiant smile and poised demeanor. A fleeting shadow in her eyes, a momentary lapse in her seemingly perfect composure, as if there was a part of her that was distant, hidden beneath the layers of joy expected of a bride-to-be. It was a subtlety that most would overlook, but I found myself inexplicably drawn to it, perhaps out of a writer's curiosity or an intuitive sense that all was not as it seemed. As the wedding day approached, the town buzzed with anticipation. The ceremony was to take place at the Hastings ancestral home, a grand estate that stood on the outskirts of Oakwood, shrouded by towering oaks that seemed to guard its secrets jealously. I was among the invited guests, and as I found myself mingling with townsfolk and strangers alike, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something beneath the surface, a tension that belied the cheerful facade. It was during the rehearsal dinner that I first noticed the peculiar behavior of the Hastings family. They carried themselves with an air of superiority, their interactions with others marked by a subtle condescension. Yet, it was their unusual interest in the proceedings of the wedding, their insistence on adhering to traditions that seemed archaic even for a town like Oakwood, that piqued my interest. There were murmurs amongst the guests, whispered conversations that ceased whenever a Hastings was near, and I began to piece together the fragments of a story that lay hidden in the town's history. The night before the wedding, as the town celebrated with music and laughter, I caught a glimpse of Evelyn slipping away from the festivities, her figure disappearing into the shadows that stretched beyond the reach of the lanterns. Intrigued and concerned, I followed her, keeping a cautious distance as she made her way towards the woods that bordered the Hastings estate. The moon was full, casting an ethereal glow on the path that wound through the trees, and I moved silently, my presence unnoticed. I found Evelyn standing in a small clearing, her face lifted to the sky, a silent scream trapped in her expression. There was a desperation in her posture, a silent plea for freedom. I hesitated, unsure if I should intrude, but something compelled me to step forward, to make my presence known. She turned at the sound of my approach, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and relief. "You followed me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I did," I replied, stepping closer. "I couldn't help but notice that you seemed troubled." She laughed, a hollow sound that echoed through the trees. Troubled, she repeated, as if tasting the word. That's one way to put it. There was a pause as she looked away, her gaze lost in the darkness. Then, in a voice that trembled with a mixture of fear and determination, she began to speak of the Hastings family, of the secret that had tainted their lineage for generations. A cult, she called it, hidden beneath the veneer of respectability, a shadow that loomed over the town, its influence insidious and pervasive. According to Evelyn, the Hastings were guardians of an ancient tradition, a belief system that demanded offerings and rituals, a pact made long ago that bound them to powers beyond comprehension. The wedding, she revealed, was not just a union of two people, but a ceremony steeped in these dark traditions. She was to be the latest offering, her marriage a binding contract between the family and the forces they served. As she spoke, her fear was palpable, a living thing that seemed to reach out from her words and wrap itself around me. I listened, captivated and horrified, my mind struggling to reconcile the idyllic image of Oakwood with the sinister reality she described. I wanted to dismiss her tale as the product of an overactive imagination, but the conviction in her voice, the raw urgency of her plea, left no room for doubt. Please, she implored, help me. I can't do this alone. Her words resonated within me, stirring a sense of duty that I couldn't ignore. I agreed to help her, to find a way to escape the fate that awaited her. We devised a plan, simple yet risky, to leave Oakwood under the cover of darkness on the night of the wedding, when the town would be engrossed in celebration, their vigilance lowered by the festivities. The day of the wedding arrived, bright and clear, as if mocking the darkness that lay beneath the surface. The townsfolk gathered at the Hastings estate, their expressions a mixture of joy and reverence, unaware of the sinister undercurrents that flowed beneath the ceremony. I watched as Evelyn walked down the aisle, her movements mechanical, her eyes averted, as if to shield herself from the reality of her predicament. Charles stood waiting, his demeanor cool and composed, a man confident in the knowledge of the power he wielded. As the ceremony progressed, I remained vigilant, my mind racing with the details of our plan. Evelyn's escape hinged on timing and stealth, and I positioned myself near the edge of the gathering, ready to move the moment an opportunity presented itself. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the grounds, and the air was thick with anticipation. The moment came during the reception, as the guests lost themselves in the revelry, their laughter and music creating a cacophony that masked the sound of our departure. Evelyn slipped away, her absence unnoticed amidst the throng, and I followed, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. We made our way through the gardens, their manicured paths leading us to the cover of the woods, where the darkness embraced us like an old friend. Once we were safely hidden among the trees, Evelyn turned to me, her expression a mix of gratitude and terror. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't helped me." I nodded, acknowledging her thanks, but my mind was already focused on the next step. We needed to leave Oakwood, to put as much distance between us and the town as possible before our absence was discovered. The road stretched ahead, a dark ribbon cutting through the woods, and we set off, our footsteps quick and determined. The woods were silent save for the rustling of leaves beneath our feet, the night air cool and crisp against our skin. We spoke little, our focus on the path ahead, our senses attuned to any sign of pursuit. Hours passed, each step taking us further from the town and its secrets, but the fear that clung to us refused to dissipate, a lingering presence that shadowed our every move. As dawn approached, we reached the edge of the woods, the first rays of light filtering through the trees to illuminate a landscape that seemed foreign and unfamiliar. We paused, exhaustion pressing down on us. But there was a sense of relief, a tentative hope that perhaps we had succeeded in our escape. Yet, as we stood there, catching our breath and gathering our thoughts, a sound reached us, faint at first, but growing in intensity. A distant rumble, the unmistakable presence of pursuit. The realization hit us like a physical blow, and panic surged through my veins, spurring us into action once more. We ran, driven by desperation, the sound of our pursuers growing louder, the echo of their approach a chilling reminder of the danger we faced. The landscape blurred around us, our surroundings a kaleidoscope of shapes and colors as we pushed ourselves beyond the limits of exhaustion. But no matter how fast we ran, the distance between us and them seemed to shrink, closing in with relentless persistence. In that moment, as hope threatened to slip from our grasp, Evelyn stumbled, her foot caught on a hidden root, and I turned to help her, my heart pounding with urgency. But the momentary delay was enough, and before we could gather ourselves, they were upon us, the Hastings men, their faces etched with grim determination, their presence suffocating in its inevitability. Evelyn's scream pierced the air, a sound of defiance and despair, and I moved to shield her, my own resolve steeling against the odds we faced. But it was a futile gesture, a last stand against forces too powerful to combat. The Hastings men closed in, their intentions clear, and I felt a cold dread settle over me, a realization that we had been so close, yet so impossibly far from freedom. And then, amidst the chaos, a voice rang out a command, authoritative and unwavering, and the men hesitated, their advance halted by the words that cut through the air. I turned, my gaze drawn to the source of the command, and there she stood. Dorothy Hastings, the matriarch of the family, her presence commanding and resolute. "Enough," she said, her voice broking no argument. "Let them go." The men exchanged uncertain glances, their hesitation palpable, but Dorothy's authority was absolute, and slowly, begrudgingly, they stepped back, allowing us a path to freedom. I stood frozen, disbelief and confusion warring within me, but Evelyn wasted no time, grabbing my arm and urging me forward, her grip a lifeline in the storm. We fled, the path ahead once more clear, and as we ran, I cast a final glance back at the Hastings, their figures receding into the distance, the mystery of their intentions unsolved, their secrets remaining hidden in the shadows of Oakwood. In the days that followed, as Evelyn and I made our way to a new life far from the reach of Oakwood and its dark legacy, I found myself replaying the events in my mind, haunted by questions that lingered like ghosts in the corners of my consciousness. Why had Dorothy intervened? What had driven her to defy her own family in a moment when their power over us seemed absolute? I had no answers, only a sense of gratitude tempered by the knowledge that some mysteries are best left unsolved. But even as we settled into our new existence, the shadow of Oakwood loomed over us, an indelible mark that could not be erased. The town and its secrets had become a part of our story, woven into the fabric of our lives, a reminder of the darkness that can hide behind the most idyllic of facades. And though we had escaped, the fear lingered, a constant companion in the quiet moments, whisper of caution that urged us never to forget the lessons of the past. For Evelyn and me, life continued, shaped by the choices we had made and the paths we had taken. We found solace in the ordinary, in the mundane rituals that defined our days, but always at the edges of our awareness was the knowledge of what lay behind us, a truth that could not be denied. We were free, but freedom, we had learned, was a fragile thing. And the past, no matter how distant, was never truly gone. As the plane touched down in the heart of Japan, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Our family had signed up for an exchange program, swapping our bustling city life for a tranquil existence in a rural Japanese village for a month. The idea seemed exhilarating at first, a chance to immerse ourselves in a different culture, to experience life at a slower pace. But there was an unshakable feeling of unease, a whisper of apprehension that lingered in the back of my mind. Our destination was a small village nestled in the mountains, a place shrouded in mist and mystery. It was a world away from the concrete jungles we were used to. The houses here were traditional, with sloping roofs and paper walls, the streets narrow and winding. We were greeted warmly by the village head, a kindly old man whose eyes twinkled with the wisdom of ages. The family we were exchanging with had left us a quaint wooden house at the edge of the village. It was charming, if a bit rustic, with tatami mats and sliding doors. Outside, cherry blossoms drifted lazily in the spring breeze, painting the landscape in soft hues of pink and white. It was a scene plucked straight from a postcard, almost too perfect to be real. The first week passed in a blur of discovery. We explored the surrounding forests, their ancient trees towering like silent sentinels. The villagers were friendly, though a bit reserved, their smiles polite but cautious. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something they weren't telling us, something just beneath the surface of their hospitality. It was during one of our evening strolls that the disturbance first occurred. We were walking along a narrow path that wound through the forest, the air cool and crisp. The sun was setting, casting long shadows that danced among the trees. My daughter Lily was running ahead, her laughter echoing through the stillness. Suddenly, she stopped, her eyes wide, staring into the thicket. "Mom, look," she called, pointing. There, among the trees, was a figure, a woman it seemed, her form draped in a tattered kimono. Her hair was wild and unkempt, falling around her face in a tangled mess. She stood motionless, watching us with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. I urged Lily to keep walking, assuring her there was nothing to worry about, though I wasn't entirely convinced myself. The figure remained, still as a statue, until we rounded the bend and she was lost from view. That night I lay awake. The image of the woman burned into my mind. Who was she? What was she doing out there alone in the woods? As the days passed, I found myself growing more uneasy. The villagers began to act stranger, their warmth cooling to a distant politeness. They avoided eye contact, their conversations with us becoming terse and hurried. I couldn't understand the shift, and every attempt to bridge the growing divide seemed futile. Then came the escalation. One evening we were invited to a village gathering, a festival of sorts. It was held in the center of the village, lanterns casting a warm glow over the proceedings. Music filled the air. A haunting melody played on traditional instruments. There was a palpable energy, an undercurrent of something old and powerful. As the night wore on, I noticed the villagers seemed to be avoiding a certain area. A patch of ground that was darker, the grass there appearing withered and lifeless. Curiosity got the better of me, and I approached it, feeling a strange pull. Just as I reached the edge, the village head appeared, his expression grave. "You must not go there," he said, his voice low and urgent. "It is sacred ground, tainted by the Yamuba." The name sent a shiver down my spine. I had heard stories of the Yamuba, a supernatural creature said to haunt the mountains, a witch who led travelers astray. It was a legend, a myth, or so I thought. But the fear in the man's eyes was all too real. Despite his warning, I couldn't shake the feeling that the woman in the forest was somehow connected to all of this, that she was the key to understanding what was happening. But how could I confront something that might not even exist? That night, as I lay in bed, I heard a soft tapping at the window. I rose cautiously, peering into the darkness. There, standing just beyond the glow of the house, was the woman again. Her eyes were luminous, reflecting the moonlight, and she beckoned to me with a slow, deliberate gesture. Fear gripped me, but so did an inexplicable urge to follow. I slipped on my shoes and crept out of the house, careful not to wake the others. The air was thick with anticipation as I made my way into the forest. The woman's figure a pale specter guiding me. She led me deeper into the woods, to a clearing where the moon cast its silvery light. There she stopped, turning to face me. Her features were clearer now, her eyes sharp and clever, but there was a sadness to her, an ancient sorrow that seemed to weigh upon her shoulders. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. "This village is cursed, and you are in danger." I opened my mouth to speak, to ask the countless questions that filled my mind, but she held up a hand to silence me. "The villagers have made a pact with the Yamaube long ago, a bargain for prosperity at a terrible cost. That ground you saw, it is where they pay their due." Her words were like ice, chilling me to the core. I wanted to deny it, to reject the very notion of such horror, but the truth was undeniable. The villagers, their strange behavior, the woman's presence, it all fit together with dreadful clarity. I begged her to help us, to tell us how to break the curse, but she shook her head. "The Yamoba cannot be cheated, but you must leave. Take your family and go before it is too late." With that, she turned and disappeared into the forest, leaving me alone with the weight of her warning. I made my way back to the house in a daze, the reality of our situation settling over me like a suffocating shroud. The next morning, I was determined to heed her advice, to get my family out of the village. But as I tried to convince them, it became clear that something was wrong. My husband, normally logical and decisive, seemed strangely lethargic, as if in a trance. Lily, too, was unusually quiet, her bright spirit dimmed. Desperation clawed at me as I realized the full extent of the village's hold. Time was slipping away, and I was helpless to stop it. In a last-ditch effort, I decided to confront the village head, to demand answers and plead for our release. I found him near the sacred ground, his expression somber as he tended to the withered patch. "You must understand," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "We had no choice. The Yamuba's demands must be met." "But at what cost?" I cried, my voice breaking. "There must be another way." He shook his head, a sadness in his eyes. "The curse is binding. Only the Yamuaba can release it, but she is merciless." As I turned away, defeated, I caught a glimpse of movement at the edge of the forest. It was the woman again, watching silently. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I understood. She was more than a warning. She was a guide, a beacon in the darkness. Gathering what strength I had left, I returned to my family, urging them to pack their things. The urgency in my voice seemed to break through their stupor, and we hurriedly gathered our belongings. As we made our way to the edge of the village, I felt the weight lifting, the oppressive air dissipating. We left without looking back, the road winding away from the village, the mountains rising like ancient guardians. The relief was palpable as we put distance between us and the cursed place, the woman's warning echoing in my mind. But even as we returned to the familiarity of city life, the fear lingered, a shadow that refused to fade. I would wake in the night, heart pounding, sure I had heard the tapping at the window. I would walk through crowded streets and feel the weight of unseen eyes. The memory of the village and the woman who haunted it remained, a reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of normalcy. I often wondered what had become of the villagers, of their silent pact and the terrible price they paid. And sometimes, in the quiet moments of the night, I would think of the woman in the forest, wondering if she was still watching, still guarding the boundary between our world and the one that lay hidden in the shadows. As the days turned into months and months into years, the fear never quite left, an indelible mark etched into our lives. The Yamuba, the cursed ground, the haunted village, they were all part of a story I could never fully escape. A tale whispered to me by the wind in the trees. A haunting melody that played on, long after the last note had faded. I had always been drawn to the quiet allure of Japan, its delicate balance of serenity and concealed depth. Thus, when the opportunity to live with a Japanese family as an exchange student presented itself, I grasped it eagerly. The Nomura family lived in a rural village, far removed from the bustling cities everyone is so enamored with. I imagined a peaceful retreat, a chance to immerse myself in unadulterated tradition and culture. This was supposed to be a gateway into a different world. A world where I would uncover the silken threads of a life lived at a different pace. The Nomura household was an old, sprawling wooden structure nestled within dense clusters of trees and rolling fields. As I arrived, the air felt different, thicker, as if it were weighted with stories the trees could tell if one only listened. The family welcomed me with smiles and a formal reception, complete with a traditional tea ceremony. Mr. and Mrs. Nomura, along with their 2 children, Kaito and Yuki, embodied a warmth that put my initial nerves at ease. Our first few days together flowed seamlessly, with me joining them in daily activities, exploring nearby shrines and participating in village festivals. Everything was as idyllic as I had hoped. The first disturbance was subtle, almost laughably mundane. A persistent tapping sound echoed through the corridors at night, like the gentle drumming of fingertips against wood. I convinced myself it was the house settling, or perhaps a playful spirit, as some of the villagers liked to whisper about. But as the nights passed, the tapping grew louder, more insistent. I mentioned it to Yuki, the younger of the 2 children, a perceptive girl whose eyes always seemed to be seeking something just beyond reach. She shrugged, a playful smirk on her lips, and said, "It's just the house talking to you. It likes to know who stays inside its walls." One night, as the tapping grew unbearably loud, I got up to investigate. The house was a labyrinth of darkened hallways and shoji screens that slid open with a whisper. My footsteps echoed as I traced the sound to its source, an exquisite but faded tapestry hanging in the main hallway. The tapestry depicted a scene of what appeared to be an ancient ritual. Figures draped in robes, encircling a central figure with outstretched arms. The fingers of the figures seemed unnaturally elongated, and their eyes were mere slits of darkness, staring directly at me. My skin prickled with an unplaceable unease. When I mentioned the tapestry to the family at breakfast, an awkward silence fell over the table, broken only by the gentle clinking of chopsticks. Mr. Nomura finally spoke, his voice measured and calm. "It is an old family heirloom. It tells a story of protection and prosperity." His explanation seemed rehearsed, as if it were a tale spun too many times before, worn at its edges. The escalation came with the discovery of symbols carved into the wooden beams of the house. Intricate patterns that mirrored those on the tapestry. They were hidden, covered by furniture, or concealed within the shadows of the eaves. I happened upon them by accident, my curiosity leading me to run my fingers over the carved wood as I wandered. Each touch sent a shiver down my spine, a sensation of being watched or followed. It was irrational, I told myself, just an overactive imagination fueled by my new surroundings. But soon, my dreams were invaded by unsettling visions. The Nomura family, garbed in the robes of the figures from the tapestry, their faces obscured, stood in a circle around a flickering fire. Their chants were a low hum, a foreign cadence that echoed in my mind long after I awoke. The central figure, with its elongated fingers, reached out to me from the flames, a beckoning, a promise, or perhaps a threat. I awoke drenched in sweat, my heart pounding, the echoes of their chant still ringing in my ears. The climax of my horror came one evening when the village celebrated a local festival. The Nomura family insisted I join them in wearing traditional attire, the heavy silk of the kimono pressing against my skin like an oppressive shroud. As we walked to the festival, the night air was filled with the sound of laughter and music, yet beneath the surface, an undercurrent of something primal thrummed. At the festival center was a large bonfire, surrounded by villagers who swayed rhythmically to the haunting melody of flutes and drums. I was drawn in, my feet moving almost of their own accord towards the circle. The faces around me blurred, the flames casting shadows that danced and twisted into grotesque forms. I found myself standing opposite the Nomura family, their eyes reflecting the fire's glow, their expressions a mix of warmth and something else, something hungry. The chant from my dreams filled the air, the villagers' voices rising in a crescendo that matched the beat of my racing heart. As I stood there, rooted in place, the world seemed to contract, leaving only the heat of the flames and the penetrating gaze of the family. In that moment, I understood. The tapestry, the symbols, the dreams, they were parts of a whole, a ritual as old as the village itself. A ritual that required an outsider, a sacrifice to feed whatever ancient hunger lingered in this place. A primal fear seized me, urging me to run, to break free from the circle that seemed to tighten with each beat of the drums. As if sensing my intent, Yuki stepped forward, her hand outstretched. Her eyes, usually so full of mirth, were now deep pools of darkness. "It will be over soon," she whispered, her voice lost in the cacophony. I turned and fled, my feet pounding against the earth, the sound of the festival fading behind me. I ran until my lungs burned and my muscles screamed for respite, finding refuge in a small grove of trees at the edge of the village. There I collapsed, my mind a whirl of terror and disbelief. The symbols and the chant haunted me, an inescapable echo of a truth I could not yet fully comprehend. The fear lingered long after the festival ended, a shadow that clung to the corners of my mind. I left the Nomura family shortly after, citing a family emergency, my departure abrupt and filled with awkward farewells. Their smiles were as warm as ever, but I could see the flicker of something else in their eyes, disappointment perhaps, or the anticipation of another opportunity. Back in the safety of my own home, I tried to rationalize the events, to dismiss them as a cultural misunderstanding or a nightmare conjured by an overactive imagination. Yet, the memory of those eyes, of the chant, refused to fade. I often dream of returning to that village to uncover the secrets it holds, but a part of me fears what I might find. Despite the distance and time, the unease remains. A lingering presence that watches from the shadows of my memory. The Nomura family and their village are far away, yet in quiet moments, when the wind whispers through the trees, I hear the echo of that night, a reminder that some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. Pendletown was a place that seemed to exist outside the flow of time. Nestled in a valley surrounded by dense ancient forests, it was the kind of village that almost felt forgotten by the modern world. The homes were old, their timbers still strong, but bearing the weight of history in their creaking floors and whispering walls. Life followed a slow, predictable rhythm, dictated by the rising and setting sun, the planting and harvest seasons, and the steady tolling of the village bell. I had moved to Pendletown not out of necessity, but out of curiosity. A historian by trade, I was drawn to places like these, places where the past lingered in the present like a persistent shadow. My arrival was met with polite, if somewhat reserved, hospitality. The villagers were cordial, but there was a mutual understanding that I was an outsider. I rented a small cottage on the outskirts, where the forest pressed close, its presence both comforting and slightly unsettling. For the first few weeks, life in Pendletown was uneventful. I spent my days exploring the village, taking notes on its architecture and poring over public records in the town hall. The villagers went about their daily routines with an unspoken ease that spoke of deep-rooted tradition. The only oddity was the bell. Every evening, at precisely 7 o'clock, it would ring, sending its clear, resonant tones echoing across the valley. It was not a church bell, nor did it seem connected to any particular event or announcement. It simply rang, and life went on. Then came the first hint that not everything in Pendletown was as quaint as it seemed. It was a chilly autumn evening, and I was returning from a lengthy walk, my mind absorbed in the colorful tapestries of leaves underfoot. As I passed the village square, I noticed a group of villagers gathered around the bell tower. Their posture was tense, their voices hushed. Curiosity piqued. I approached, but as soon as they noticed me, the group dispersed, leaving behind an uncomfortable silence. The incident left me with a prickling sensation at the back of my neck, a whisper of unease that clung to me as I made my way back to my cottage. That night, I woke to a sound that was not the bell. It was a low, rhythmic chanting, eerie and dissonant, floating through the night air like a ghostly lullaby. I rose from my bed and peered through the window, but the village lay shrouded in darkness, betraying nothing of the source. The chanting continued for several minutes, then stopped as abruptly as it had begun, leaving an oppressive stillness in its wake. The next morning, as I ventured into the village, I found the atmosphere subtly altered. There was a wariness in the villagers' eyes, a guardedness that hadn't been there before. When I inquired about the previous night's events, I was met with blank stares and evasive responses. Just the wind, they would say, or the forest has a way of playing tricks. But I knew what I had heard, and the dismissals only deepened my resolve to uncover the truth. As the days turned into weeks, my inquiries were met with increasing resistance. The villagers grew more protective of their routines, their gazes more suspicious. Yet the evening bell continued to toll, an unwavering constant amidst the growing tension, and each night the chanting would return, its cadence weaving through the shadows like a living thing. Driven by a restless curiosity, I began to spend my nights in the village square, hidden in the shadows, waiting for the source of the chanting to reveal itself. On the third night of my vigil, my patience was rewarded. A procession emerged from the depths of the forest, moving with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly. The villagers, clad in robes of deep green and brown, their faces obscured by hoods, formed a solemn line as they approached the bell tower. At the head of the procession was a figure different from the rest, taller and with an aura of authority. This figure carried a staff, adorned with talismans that glinted in the moonlight. The chanting grew louder as they reached the tower, its rhythm synchronizing with the tolling of the bell. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched, both fascinated and fearful of the ritual unfolding before me. The figure raised the staff, and the bell tolled one final, resonant note. Silence descended, thick and tangible. In that silence, I sensed a shift, as though the very fabric of reality had been stretched thin. The air crackled with a strange energy, and I felt a presence, ancient and powerful, brushing against the edges of my awareness. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the ritual ended. The villagers dispersed into the night, their figures swallowed by the shadows of the forest. The bell tower stood silent, an enigmatic sentinel, keeping watch over the slumbering village. In the days that followed, I tried to piece together what I had witnessed. The villagers, though aware of my presence that night, did not acknowledge it, nor did they offer any explanation. The ritual, it seemed, was a secret they were determined to keep, a pact between them and whatever forces they had summoned. But the chanting had left its mark on me, a lingering fear that burrowed deep into my bones. I began to see shadows where there should be none, hear whispers in the rustling leaves. The forest felt alive, its ancient trees watching with eyes unseen. One evening, driven by a mixture of dread and desperation, I ventured into the forest, following the path the procession had taken. The woods closed around me, their silence heavy and expectant. As I walked, I became aware of a pull, an invisible thread drawing me deeper into the heart of the forest. There, in a small clearing bathed in the silver light of the moon, I found the source of the chanting. A circle of stones, ancient and worn, stood at the center, their surfaces etched with symbols that seemed to pulse with an inner light. The air was thick with the scent of earth, and something else, something metallic and sharp. As I approached, the chanting returned, louder and more insistent. It filled my mind, drowning out all rational thought, compelling me to step into the circle. My heart raced, fear warring with a strange compulsion to give in to the rhythm. But then, a voice, gentle yet firm, cut through the clamor in my head. It was the figure from the ritual, standing at the edge of the clearing. "You should not be here," they said, their voice carrying a weight of authority and concern. "This place is not for you." Their words broke the spell, and I staggered back, the chanting receding into the distance. The figure watched me with eyes that seemed to hold the secrets of the universe, and for a moment I glimpsed the depths of the mystery that enveloped Penland Town. "I just want to understand," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, the enormity of what I had seen rendering me vulnerable and small. The figure regarded me for a long moment before speaking. "There are forces at play here that are beyond human comprehension. We safeguard this place, maintain the balance. It is our burden and our privilege." With that, they turned and disappeared into the forest, leaving me alone in the clearing. The chanting had ceased, and the stones stood silent, their glow fading with the moonlight. I returned to my cottage, the events of the night etched vividly in my mind. In the days that followed, I noticed a change in the village. The atmosphere was lighter, the villagers more at ease. The bell continued to toll, but its sound no longer seemed ominous. The presence I had felt in the forest, while still there, no longer felt threatening. Yet, despite the outward normalcy, a part of me was forever altered. The memory of that night lingered, a dark undercurrent in the peaceful facade of Penland Town. I understood, now, that the village's rhythms were not merely dictated by seasons or the sun, but by something ancient and powerful, something that demanded both respect and fear. In the end, I chose to leave Pendletown, the weight of its secrets too heavy for me to bear. But the village stayed with me, haunting my thoughts and dreams, its mysteries whispering in the corners of my mind, and I knew deep down that the bell would continue to toll, marking time in a place where time itself was a mystery, and the chants would rise with the moon, a reminder of the unseen forces that governed the hidden world of Pendletown. Point Pine was a town that seemed to exist out of time, nestled deep within the folds of an ancient, whispering forest. The town's narrow streets were lined with weather-worn houses, their peeling paint and sagging porches hinting at stories long forgotten. It was a place where the past and present intertwined seamlessly, where shadows lingered a little too long, and the air always felt thick with secrets. Having grown up here, I considered myself intimately familiar with Point Pine's quirks. Its enigmatic charm held a certain allure, one that I both feared and cherished. Life in Point Pine moved at its own pace, unhurried by the world beyond the forest's edge. The townsfolk, resilient and accustomed to the peculiarities of their home, went about their days with a calm acceptance of the unexplainable. Fog rolled in, like a living creature, weaving through the trees and creeping into every corner. The silence of the town was punctuated only by the faint rustle of leaves, a sound that had become a lullaby of sorts, soothing yet unsettling. I often found myself wandering the wooded paths surrounding the town, drawn by a curiosity I could never quite quench. There was something about the forest that called to me, its depths promising mysteries and perhaps a glimpse into the unknown. On one such day, as the sun dipped below the canopy and cast long shadows across the path, I stumbled upon something unusual. A stone marker, half buried and covered in moss. Engraved upon it was a symbol I had never seen before, a complex intertwining of lines that seemed to pulse with a strange energy. This discovery was the first disturbance in my otherwise predictable life. The symbol haunted my thoughts, its presence lingering in the corners of my mind like a forgotten melody. I became obsessed, scouring the town's sparse library for any mention of such a mark. But it was as if the symbol did not exist, erased from history or hidden deliberately. My inquiries were met with tight-lipped smiles and evasive glances from the older residents, who seemed to know more than they cared to admit. As days turned into weeks, my obsession deepened. I began to notice subtle changes in the town, as if it too had become aware of my search. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to deepen, pooling in places where light should have prevailed. Faces I had known all my life became unfamiliar, eyes glinting with a knowledge they refused to share. Even the forest, once a sanctuary, felt watchful and alive, its branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. It was during one of my nightly wanderings that I stumbled upon an old journal hidden within the hollow of a tree. The pages were brittle and yellowed with age, filled with spidery handwriting that detailed the town's history far beyond what anyone had ever spoken of. Tales of rituals conducted in the forest, of a pact made with the unseen, and the symbol, a key, to forbidden knowledge that could unravel the fabric of reality itself. Each entry hinted at a darkness lurking beneath Point Pine's quaint facade, a darkness that had been carefully guarded for generations. The escalation of events was subtle yet relentless. I felt as though I was being pulled deeper into a web of intrigue and danger. Vivid dreams plagued my nights, dreams where the symbol glowed with an ethereal light, revealing glimpses of something monstrous and beautiful beyond comprehension. The dreams were both a warning and an invitation, urging me to seek out the truth that lay hidden beneath layers of secrecy. Driven by a compulsion I could not explain, I set out into the forest one evening, guided by an instinct that felt both foreign and familiar. The path was one I knew well, yet it seemed different, as if the forest itself had shifted to align with my intentions. The air was thick with anticipation, and the usual sounds of the night were absent, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed in from all sides. At the heart of the forest, where the trees grew so densely that they blotted out the moonlight, I found a clearing bathed in an unnatural glow. In its center stood a stone altar, ancient and weathered, engraved with the same symbol that had led me here. Surrounding it were figures cloaked in shadow, their faces obscured but their presence undeniable. They watched me with eyes that burned with an otherworldly intensity, and I knew I had trespassed upon something far greater than myself. The climax of my journey unfolded in a series of surreal moments. The figures began to chant in a language that resonated with a primal force, each word vibrating through the air and stirring something deep within me. I felt the boundaries of reality fraying, as if the world itself was unraveling, thread by thread. The symbol on the altar began to glow, its light growing ever brighter until it was almost blinding. In that moment, I understood the true nature of Point Pine's secret, a knowledge so vast and incomprehensible that it defied the very notion of sanity. The town's history was not one of happenstance, but of design, a deliberate intertwining of destiny and desire for power that had persisted through the ages. The pact, the rituals, the symbol, all were part of a grand tapestry woven from the fabric of existence itself. But with this knowledge came a price, a burden that weighed heavily upon my soul, demanding a sacrifice I was not prepared to make. As the chanting reached its crescendo, I felt myself pulled into the light, drawn towards the heart of the symbol where all things converged. It was a moment of transcendence and terror, a glimpse into the infinite that left me teetering on the brink of madness. Yet, just as quickly as it had begun, it ended, the light fading and the figures retreating into the shadows once more, leaving me alone in the clearing. In the lingering fear that followed, I found myself forever changed. Point Pine was no longer a quaint, mysterious town, but a place of countless secrets, each more terrifying than the last. The knowledge I had glimpsed refused to be contained, echoing in my mind with an insidious persistence. I could no longer find solace in the familiar sights and sounds of my home, for they now only served as reminders of the truth that lay beneath. The townsfolk, though polite and seemingly unchanged, regarded me with a mixture of pity and caution. They knew, as did I, that some secrets were never meant to be uncovered, that some knowledge came at too great a cost. I was haunted not only by what I had learned, but by the realization that the darkness within Point Pine would continue, its legacy passed down through generations like a malignant inheritance. As I walked the forest paths, now wary of what might be lurking beyond the trees, I felt the weight of my discovery pressing down on me with a relentless force. The symbol, once a curiosity, had become a symbol of my own undoing, a reminder of the forbidden knowledge that had forever altered my perception of reality. And though I longed for the comfort of ignorance, I knew there was no turning back. The secrets of Point Pine were now mine to bear, a silent testament to the price of curiosity and the unyielding pull of the unknown. It was one of those mild spring mornings in early April when the world seemed to be held in a delicate balance between the departing chill of winter and the burgeoning warmth of the forthcoming summer. The park near my hometown, with its sprawling trails and lush greenery, had always been a place of solace and reflection. It was a small state park, tucked away on the fringes of our town, and known only to the locals who valued its unassuming beauty. There were no grandiose attractions, merely the serenity of nature speaking in soft whispers through the rustling leaves and the gentle babble of a brook that meandered through its heart. I had spent countless afternoons walking the trails, often finding myself seated on the same weathered bench nestled beneath a towering oak. There, I would lose myself in thought, or the pages of a book, feeling the world slip away with each passing minute. Life had become a predictable rhythm, one that I cherished. The days passed in quiet continuity, punctuated by the occasional weekend excursion to the city or dinner with friends. I worked a job that kept the bills paid and allowed me moments like these, moments of peaceful introspection amidst nature's embrace. It was during one of these tranquil visits that the first disturbance occurred. I was on my usual stroll, following the trail that wound through the dense canopy of trees. The sun filtered through the leaves in fragmented patterns, casting playful shadows on the path. I was just approaching the brook, its waters murmurings an accompaniment to my thoughts, when a voice called out to me, "Excuse me, sir." I turned to see a man standing a few feet away from me. He was tall, with an air of unassuming authority, dressed in the kind of attire that suggested he belonged to the park's staff. His uniform was neat, though it bore no insignia, and his eyes, the color of unfathomable depth, seemed to hold a strange intensity. "I'm sorry to interrupt your walk," he began, offering a thin smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "We're conducting some administrative work around the park, and I was wondering if you'd be interested in a short-term position. It involves some small maintenance tasks and keeping an eye on the area. Pays rather well." His offer was unexpected, and for a moment I hesitated. The job seemed straightforward enough, though it was peculiar for such a proposal to come out of the blue. Yet something in his demeanor, or perhaps the allure of a change in my monotonous routine, compelled me to agree. "That sounds interesting," I replied cautiously. "I'd like to hear more about it." We spoke at length amid the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant call of birds. He explained the nature of the tasks. Simple maintenance, ensuring the trails remained clear and reporting any unusual occurrences. It seemed innocuous, and he assured me it was only for a few weeks. The pay, as he mentioned, was indeed generous, an offer difficult to refuse. As I accepted, he handed me a small, nondescript envelope, worn at the edges. Inside was a schedule and a key, presumably for a small tool shed located near the park's entrance. He introduced himself as Mr. Gray, and with a nod, walked away, leaving me to contemplate the curious turn my day had taken. The first few days of my employment were uneventful. I performed my duties diligently, enjoying the extra time spent within the park. The tranquility of the environment made the tasks feel less like work and more like an extension of my usual visits. Yet as the week progressed, a subtle tension began to weave its way into the fabric of my routine. It started with the sound, a low hum that seemed to resonate within the very air of the park. At first, I attributed it to the natural symphony of the forest, a trick of the wind, perhaps. But as the days wore on, the sound grew more persistent, always lurking just beyond the threshold of conscious hearing. It filled the spaces between my thoughts, unsettling in its constancy. Then there were the shadows. They moved in ways that defied the logic of sunlight and terrain, creeping along paths they should not traverse, elongated and distorted. They seemed to flicker at the peripheries of my vision, always gone when I turned to face them, leaving only an echo of doubt in their wake. I tried to dismiss these occurrences as figments of my imagination, perhaps heightened by the solitude and the eerie quiet of the park. But on the fourth day, something happened that shattered the fragile veneer of normalcy I clung to. I was near the old oak, my favorite spot, when I noticed a figure standing across the clearing. It was a child, or so I thought at first glance, wearing a pale dress that fluttered in the breeze. Her hair was dark and cascaded down her back, obscuring her face. She stood motionless, as if waiting for something, or someone. "Hello?" I called out, taking a cautious step forward. There was no response. The figure remained still, the surrounding air heavy with an indefinable anticipation. I felt an inexplicable pull, a compulsion to approach her, though every instinct screamed that I should turn and leave. As I neared, the hume intensified, wrapping around me like a shroud. I could feel it vibrating through my bones, a sensation both unsettling and strangely euphoric. The child lifted her head, and for a brief moment I glimpsed her eyes, pools of darkness that seemed to swallow the light. Cold terror gripped me and I stumbled backward, my heart hammering in my chest. The figure dissolved into the shadows, leaving me alone in the clearing once more. I stood there, breathless and shaken, aware that something was profoundly wrong. The park, which once felt like a haven, now seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. An ancient presence that had awakened. I retreated from the clearing, my mind a tumult of fear and disbelief. My steps quickened, driven by an irrational urgency to return to the perceived safety of my home. But as I reached the trailhead, a chilling realization struck. I was not alone. The forest felt alive, watching, waiting, the shadows closing in with each step I took. Sleep eluded me that night, my mind replaying the encounter with relentless precision. The child's eyes haunted my dreams, their dark depths mocking my attempts to find rational explanations. The park was no longer a place of sanctuary. It was an enigma wrapped in dread, and I was ensnared within its grasp. The following day I resolved to confront Mr. Gray. I needed answers, clarity, anything to dispel the growing sense of unease. Yet when I returned to the park, he was nowhere to be found. The staff office was empty, and the few employees I encountered seemed oblivious to his existence. It was as if he had vanished, leaving behind only questions and an oppressive silence that weighed heavily upon me. Determined to unravel the mystery, I delved into the park's history, scouring local archives and old newspapers. What I discovered was a tapestry of folklore and whispered legends, tales of sacrifices and rituals that took place long before the land became a state park. There were accounts of disappearances, of people lured to the woods by phantom calls, never to return. The park, it seemed, held secrets far older and darker than I could have imagined. As the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, the realization dawned upon me with chilling clarity. The park was a nexus of something ancient, an inescapable evil that thrived on the unwary, and I, unknowingly, had become a part of its design, ensnared in a web that tightened with each passing day. The climax came one fateful night, when I returned to the park, driven by a desperate need to confront whatever forces resided there. The hum was louder than ever, a cacophony that drowned out reason and fear alike. The shadows twisted and writhed, forming grotesque shapes that danced in the moonlight. I reached the clearing near the oak, the air thick with anticipation. The child was there, her form flickering between reality and night. She raised a hand beckoning, and I felt myself compelled to obey, my will no longer my own. As I crossed the threshold into her domain, the ground beneath me seemed to shift, pulling me deeper into the heart of the park. The world around me blurred, the lines between past and present dissolving in a maelstrom of light and shadow. I was no longer a mere observer, but a participant in an age-old ritual, my actions dictated by forces beyond comprehension. In that moment of surrender, I felt a connection, a thread of understanding that linked me to the countless others who had walked this path before. The park was a conduit, a bridge between worlds, and those who entered became part of its eternal cycle, their essence woven into the fabric of its existence. When I finally emerged from the park, the dawn light breaking over the horizon, I was forever changed. The mundane reality of my former life seemed distant, overshadowed by the weight of the knowledge I now carried. The park had claimed a part of me, binding me to its dark legacy, a reminder of the inescapable evil that lurked beneath the veneer of serenity. Though I never returned, the park remained a constant presence in my thoughts, an ever-present shadow that followed me through the days. The hum lingered at the edges of my hearing, a spectral song that called to me in dreams, a reminder of promises unfulfilled and mysteries unsolved. The world continued in its ceaseless march, yet I was forever marked by my encounter with the park. I lived with the lingering fear that one day it would call me back, and I would be unable to resist. The park was patient, and its pull inexorable, a reminder that some evils are eternal, waiting in the shadows for the unwary to stumble upon their domain.